The pasuk, right, that we have in the Parsha, that many people say every day is part of the six Zakiras, what's called, the host would like you to speak. Is everything okay? Hope so. Okay, so the Torah says, Zohar es asher asa Hashem Elokecha Miriam, b'derech b'tzeistem miMitzrayim. Remember what Hashem did to Miriam when you were on the way, when you were leaving Mitzrayim. So the Medrash, the Sifri, is going to be the basis for what a lot of the Rishonim say, what we're supposed to remember, is a Kal V'chomer. A Kal V'chomer in, what's the Latin name for it again? A priori argument, they said. Okay, meaning, hello, Kal V'chomer, isn't there a Kal V'chomer? Uman Miriam, Shalo Dibra Ela B'fonov Shel Moshe. Okay, this is a discussion. Was Moshe in on the conversation? It says that part of our problem this week is the events that the Pasuk is linked to happen back in Parshas Balos, where it says about the Daber Miriam Ba'aron B'Moshe, Alados Isha Kushis Lachelokov Ki Isha Kushis Lach. So they were speaking about his marriage to the woman with the mysterious name, the Isha Kushis, right? And Chazal filled in that they were speaking about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu separated from his wife, right? There was Parshas. Now again, when you look in the Mefarshim, they have a very difficult time with that phrase Isha Kushis, right? Some describe it means beautiful. The Anshe Pshat, like the Rashbam, Ibn Ezra bump into a problem. They say it can't be Tzipora because she wasn't from Cush. She was from Midian. And they actually fall back on the Medrash that talks about those missing years in Moshe Rabbeinu's biography in which he went to Ethiopia and married an Ethiopian princess. But they said he was always Parish from her. He always separated from that Ethiopian princess. Right? It's a strange thing there. So the question is, what were they speaking about here? So the Sifri is talking about the idea that they were talking about Moshe Rabbeinu separating from his wife, right? There's a medrash that when Eldad Umeidad started to prophesy, again in Parshas Baloscha, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mi ten kol Hashem nevim, and the Tzipora said, woe to their wives, right? Because my husband is a Navi, and he separated from it. So going back to the Sifri, he said she spoke before of Shel Moshe, okay? There's a remez in the Pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu was there at the time. Ulana also Shel Moshe. They were speaking for Moshe Rabbeinu's benefit. They wanted him to have a good married life. Ulashimcho Shel Moshe, and they were praising Moshe Rabbeinu in the conversation, the Binyana Shel Olam, and they wanted the world to be built as it should be through a marriage. Kach Nemsha, and Miriam was punished in that way. Hamadaber B'Gnus Chavero Barabin. So a person who does your garden variety Lashon Hara, where you trash somebody in the presence of many people, right? Allah has kama v'kama. Imagine the punishment that you should get. Okay, this is the Rambam. And again, it's very unusual that the Rambam goes on an editorial. There's a few places in the Yad HaZokah that he does that at the end of Tumas Tzaras, right? He says the mitzvah of Zohar that's here in Parshas Seitzei to remember what Hashem did to Miriam. He's bonenu. Think deeply. Ma'ira la Miriam Anavia. What happened to her? Shedibra be'a'iha. She spoke about her brother. It was a famous conversation. Shaisa Gedolim Meter B'Shanim. It was her little brother. V'gidalto al birkel. She brought him up on her knees. V'sikna ba'atzma l'atzilo minayam. She endangered herself to save him when he was put in the water. V'lotibra b'knuso. She wasn't denigrating Moshe Rabbeinu. El shetosel. V'yishvoso l'shar navi. All she did was compare Moshe Rabbeinu to other Nevi'im. The greatest Nevi'im that were known in history to that point, as Ron pointed out, the Avodas, were all married and stayed married. And she was wondering, how could it be that Moshe Rabbeinu has to do this? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't mind that she said this. That's why the Pasuk in Balosa says, Alish Moshe Onav Mod Mikol Adam Ashal Pnei Adama. He was more Onav, more humble, didn't bother it. Nonetheless, she got tzaras. Kal v'chomer libnei adam arashayim v'atipshim, and then he goes on like the Sifrei, Kal v'chomer to fools who speak all of these things. Okay, so that is the common explanation that we find, right? Remember what Hashem did to Miriam to scare you to not say Lashon Hara, right? Because you aren't close to Miriam. You aren't interviewed. The Lashon Hara you're saying doesn't have all of those different conditions that make it not so bad, right? So don't say that Lashon Hara. The problem is, and I was so happy when I found it phrased this way, both by Chasam Sofer and by Rabbi Sher, the Slobodka Yeshiva in Europe, the son-in-law of the Alter of Slobodka, says, isn't the Torah telling us to say Lashon Hara about Miriam every day? So it's by saying you should say every day, Zachar Sasher Sa Hashem Elokechem Miriam, but there it says Mitzrayim. Right? This doesn't seem nice. It's true. We do point out that the Torah writes Chete Rishonim, what's called. It writes when people in Tanakh did something wrong that we should learn from it. But that's not telling us to say every day, every kid in school, remember what Miriam did. And Miriam did lots of wonderful things in her life. That's what we have to remember Miriam for. Right? It seems like a Lashon Hara. Right? It's a very difficult way to say such a thing. Right? And so we have a few approaches that will hopefully help us. First of all, in terms of the technicals, if we are entering the world of Lashon Hara, and we think about the discussion that was Miriam and Aaron, perhaps in the presence of Moshe, perhaps not, discussing the fact that something was wrong in his family life, that they felt that it should be improved, that even though he's a Navi, he should still be living with his wife as they were. Now, so many families have these kind of conversations. One brother and a sister are talking about the little brother, what should be done, what he's doing really isn't so good, how can we help him? And we don't classify a conversation like that as Lashon Hara. Why? Because there's one big word that everybody loves when it comes to Lashon Hara, that's called to'eles. To'eles means for a positive purpose. Okay, and that has become like the green card for any Lashon Hara you want to say. Just like on Shabbos, when you want to talk about money, so you say, this Shabbos Kiret, how much did you pay for that car? It was in the Shabbos Kiret, $10,000. Is it whatever? So in terms of Lashon Hara, you start off by saying, this is a to'eles, right, just for a purpose. We believe what he did, right? So it can't be abused, but it is real when you're trying to help someone, when trying to improve a situation, when you're doing something that is allowed. That is not Lashon Hara. So how does it work? The Chasam says that what was missing, the Chasam says is that there was one small thing here that was already pointed out by the Rambam. They compared him to other Nevi'im. In having this discussion, the basis of the discussion, where they felt that Moshe Rabbeinu was doing something that he shouldn't continue to do it, was all based on the thought that he was a Navi, but Avraham Avinu was a Navi, Yitzchak was, I am, Miriam says, you are Aaron, we're Nevi'im. And Hashem never told us to separate from our spouse. He says that one little piece there was called not judging Moshe Rabbeinu l'kaskos. Meaning, if you're saying something for to'eles, if I'm discussing something for a positive purpose, so to speak, but I've already framed in my mind that the person is doing something negative because I saw what they were doing and I didn't judge them favorably. I didn't come up with this idea, wait a second, Moshe Rabbeinu is Moshe Rabbeinu. And if he's doing this, maybe there's some reason that he's doing something different than all other Nevi'im. Maybe we should ask him why this should be. Right? This is brought down in the story. And that is what transformed a really purposeful to'eles type of conversation into Lashon. The Chavetz says even on the receiving end, in terms of being shomea Lashon Hara, a person might hear a fact, and okay, but if you frame that fact in it, or if as he hears the fact, he judges the person unfavorably, he has transformed it into Lashon Hara. right? It was a fact. He said, there's so-and-so, got a great score on the golf course this morning. And so you decided, that means it probably, didn't go to davening and didn't learn with his tablis. So you took a very garden variety piece of information, and by judging him unfavorably, you transformed it into Lashon Hara. So this is already a lesson which it's meant to teach us. This is why Rabbi Chaim Wasserman says, why isn't it treated even more harshly? If she's denying the uniqueness of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah, that's one of the Rambam's 13 Ikari, that Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah is unique. No other nevuah is equivalent to it. He says, you know what? That chiddush came about in this story. When Hashem said, Lo chen avdi Moshe b'kol beisi nelanu, el pe'adaber bo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, his nevuah is like nothing that you can comprehend. It's nothing to do with your nevuah. That didn't come into the world yet, that chiddush, at the time. This is something that was brought in. So what we learn from them is to remember this idea of being so careful about judging people favorably. That was what made the entire difference in what would have been a positive discussion. And take note, a few of the Mefarshim say, the Malbim and others, it doesn't say, remember what Miriam did. Remember that Miriam spoke Lashon Hara. It says, remember what Hashem did to Miriam. So now we get to the world of the defenders. Meaning, the Chasam Sofer has an approach like this, and Rabbi Isaac Sher was very famous, and we'll get to his approach in general to the different events in Tanakh and the people who are involved in them. The Chasam Sofer says that the entire conversation was one of praise. They were praising Moshe Rabbeinu for taking such a step to separate from his wife because he so much wanted his nebuah to be on the highest level and to be perfect. They were praising him, but he uses an interesting expression. He says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu enabled their conversation to drift into something which was slightly negative. But they said, but it is strange because we're also prophets and we didn't have to do it. Right? And he said, this is why you find warnings of and praising a person sometimes, because if you do too much lavish praise, you yourself find that you have to tone it down by saying something negative. You're proposing a shidduch. It's like, oh, this guy, he's got wonderful midos and he's a wonderful learner. Yeah, I'm not saying he's a Chavetz Chaim, he messes around like every other yeshiva guy or something like this, like last Purim, whatever, he's a regular guy. But so you're always, toning it down, and that's when you can come to say something negative. So, and again, this is a very mysterious topic, the idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu letting something happen, which it is negative in order to teach us things. The different Chazals will say, David HaMelech wasn't Roy Lo Samaisa, but it came to teach us tshuva, Miriam Yisrael, the Cheket Egel. And so the Chasam Sofer says with this here, that Sher does something even a bit more radical. And again, he builds it up at length based on his whole approach to the Tanakh. He does not like the idea of dumbing down Tanakh. Even if you can then, make it more relatable and plug in, your sister-in-law for Miriam and your brother-in-law for Aaron, and you can do this, he says, you have no idea what you're dealing with. He says, first of all, we're talking about people born Nevi'im. He says, we don't know how a person was transformed by experiencing Nevuah. We find that Shaul was told, right, you will go and you will meet this group of Nevi'im, and you will prophesy with them, you will be another person. You will be a different type of person, a different human being. You will be transformed. He says, we're not talking about right, Joe and Matilda here, we're talking about Aaron and Miriam, who were Nevi'im and experienced this Nevuah in this way. So he says, when you're talking about such people, to plug it into, they were schmoozing about Moshe, the gossip ran over a little bit, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave her a good saras. Right? He says, first of all, they're not allowed to say Lashon Hara about anybody. Right? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu emphasize telling them, right, you spoke about Moshe, right? How could you speak about Moshe? Lashon Hara is also about your cleaning lady also. Everybody, whoever it is, doesn't have to be Moshe Rabbeinu. So the idea is here, he says, that the discussion they were having was a learned discussion. They were prophets, were discussing prophecy. They were talking about how a person can progress in Nevuah. When you look in the Rambam brings down the halachas of Nevi'im. And a Novi has to be, first of all, a very righteous person, a learned person, right? Even though just a fascinating thing that the, one of our Rebbeim years ago, but not from the area, he pointed out from the Kuzar, right? It says that a Novi has to reach a great level of tzidkus. But both men and women can be Nevi'im, even if their path toward becoming a tzaddik is different. Right? In other words, if the woman doesn't have the chiyuv of Talmud Torah, but she follows her path and a man follows their path, both of them can achieve the level of nevuah that the Kuzari says is the highest level a human being can aspire to. So they were Nevi'im, but we're always supposed to be growing. And they were talking about growth, and the question was, should we also do like Moshe Rabbeinu? If we would separate from our spouse, would we be able to achieve higher levels of nevuah? Is it something Hashem wants? Right? There was a pasuk where it says, "Yishuva lachem la'aleichem," after Matan Torah, all of Am Yisrael were Nevi'im, go back to your tents, meaning go back to family life. And to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem said, "Va'ata po amodi modi." You stay with me, and that seemed to be. But they said maybe Moshe Rabbeinu already wanted to do that, and there's a principle called b'derech she'adam halech malichin also. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, gave approval to his desire to live that sacred type of life. So maybe he shouldn't have done that, or maybe we should do that. That was the discussion which was there. He said it was a discussion in terms, if we would have heard their discussion, we wouldn't have known what they were talking about. It was a discussion of Nevi'im about Nevuah, right? That's what they said. So he says, right, because of it, now let's also remember, a person who speaks Lashon Hara is a Rosh. Lashon Hara, you go in the Chavetz Chaim, you'll see, he'll describe, brings down from Chasam, that it's as bad as when a Zorah Gilarash and Kosdomim, right, that it's, the magnitude of the Avera of the Lashon Hara is horrible. A Novi has to be in a matzah of Simcha Shel Mitzvah to receive Nevuah, aside from the fact that we said that a Novi has to be a tzaddik. So in the Parsha where it says Hashem called, right, Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, he said, "Zu shalach shtechem elo moed," come all three of you to Ol Moed. And then it says Hashem came to in an Onan and he called to Miriam and Aaron to come. He says, we mistakenly view that as getting called to the principal's office. Right, saying, okay, you spoke badly about Moshe Rabbeinu, right, front and center, come into my office. He says, curious what that was? That was HaKadosh Baruch Hu summoning them to a nevuah. The Onan isn't some dark thing with lightning bolts to hurt someone. When Moshe Rabbeinu went into the Onan, he went there to receive the Torah, right? This is a sign that the Shekhinah is there. And a mitzvah was given to Am Yisrael through them. As, right, the Rebbe Hanan said, we didn't know the idea of the uniqueness of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah and how that had to be believed until this point. And we have a principle, Megalgal in Schus Hayidei Zakai. Something positive comes through a positive, meritorious person, like the people who asked about the Korban Pesach they didn't bring. So the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni came through them. B'nos Tzlofchad, who asked for a chelik of their father's inheritance, that mitzvah came through them. So he said here too, this came through people who were Zakoi. They were there. Okay, so what did happen? Nonetheless, because of this slight miscomparison that they made, and Rabbi Isaac says they should have understood that there are certain things in Judaism that we ask and we look and we do, and 100%, and we always try to ask questions endlessly. But there are certainly things in which it says, "B'mufla mincha al tidrash." There are certain things that are above and beyond you And there, it's not the world for drush. There, you can't start doing with the thon. Moshe Rabbeinu was 40 yom, 40 laila on the mountain. Lechem lo ochel, mayim lo shasa. You can't do pilpulim in Moshe Rabbeinu's Zugel. Okay, that was just there. Okay, so therefore, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu medaftik in the Hasidim the Chutas Saida, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a tzaddik, who his very action is so significant. So therefore, we see the repercussions in terms of Miriam getting saras. But nonetheless, what they were doing was trying to do something positive. Something positive came out of it, Torah that we learned. And what did Hashem do to Miriam? And this the Chasam Sofer says, and Rabbi Isaac and others. It says, Zachoras asher asa Hashem elokecha leMiriam aderech b'tzeis mitzvah. If it's talking about the fact that she got saras, number one, it's tricky to call that asher asa Hashem elokecha leMiriam. That was part of the nature of the world in those days. Right? It's part of say, we don't have saras today because we couldn't handle it. If you had to take a week off of work because you had something funny on your hand that the Kohen, right, said something about, and then, you got to go, and the Kohen comes to your house, and all the neighbors are looking, right, and everybody's sending out the messages that you're mitzvah, and he couldn't do it. But in those days, it was simply a natural occurrence. You spoke Lashon Miriam dat saras. It said Miriam should be isolated, tisager Miriam, okay, but the Malbim points out Hashem didn't do that. He said that should be her status for 7 days. He says what we should remember, and so Amlo Nosa, Ad Miriam, that Am Yisrael did not travel until Miriam was healed. This was a tremendous statement of honor and admiration for Miriam and who she was. That's why the Pasuk emphasizes Baderech b'tzeis mitzrayim. So what? So the Sifri says it was the time of your Geula. Let's remember, this was before Chet HaMarag. They were supposed to go into Eretz Yisrael right away. But Baruch Hu wanted that to happen. Am Yisrael wanted that to happen. To stop for 7 days at that point because of Miriam is a tremendous statement. And then the Agav, he says, through the back door, we'll remember that Miriam and Aaron compared Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah to that of other Nevi'im, and that was what led to that. But to go back to that question that was asked, is the Torah telling us to say Lashon Hara about Miriam every day? Absolutely not. Okay, so now let's try to take this into our world 11. The principle here is this idea of don makafskos, to judge people favorably. And there are different halachas in terms of determining the idea of who you have to judge favorably. Is the person a God-fearing person? Is he not? Is the action he did probably something negative or only 50-50 something like that? With all of those halachas that you can look up, the Sher Tshuva, Rabbeinu Yom, the Chasam brings them down also. Rabbeinu Yom said a beautiful thing. And he was really kind of paraphrasing something in Piasetz Rebbe. Piasetz Rebbe said in Chovas HaTalmidim, you got to realize the Torah doesn't just want you to do good. The Torah wants you to be good. Okay, the Torah is painting the picture of how you should be. When the Torah tells you, judge people favorably, don't start niggling, saying, okay, am I allowed to judge him unfavorably or not? He says, the Torah is telling you, you should want everybody to be zakai, to be meritorious, right? To be acquitted. That should be your desire. Anytime you see something, your immediate reaction should be, I hope it's not like it seems. I hope that it's good. I hope that he's really innocent in terms of what he did and what he was facing. That explains why it says in Chazal that a person who judges other people, l'kaf zchus, mida keneged mida, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will judge him l'kaf zchus. That's a beautiful question. How can there be a concept of judging favorably by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? We judge someone favorably because I don't know what's happening. I see a guy driving his car on Shabbos. Okay, maybe he had to take somebody to the hospital, right? It's true. Maybe he decided to stop keeping the Shabbos, very strange or something like that. I don't know. Because Baruch always knows. There's no idea of done the top schools. He's not saying, well, what happened? Was it this or was it that? I'm going to say this. He always knows. The answer is the midah, the attribute that you awaken. When you so much want a person to be zakah, when you so much want that person to be innocent, to be meritorious, So you awaken the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to want you to come out in your judgment that way as well. That's why Rabbi Yitzchak Bertitchev, at the beginning of last week's Parsha, Shoftim said, this is one of the key preparations you have to do in Elul to prepare for Rosh Hashanah, to learn to judge everyone favorably. And you have to be creative in this. Again, you don't have to be stupid. Nevin Sal Shlita from the Old City told us years ago, right? Doesn't mean if you see a man with a mask breaking your neighbor's window with a crowbar, don't say maybe that's his brother-in-law and he lost the key and he has a skin condition. All that. When you can call the police. But in terms of other things, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu created for a purpose. Why didn't he create a kruma cup? Kruma cup means our ability to do all sorts of twisted reasoning. He says to be able to be melamed Sofer, to be able to come up with defenses for people and excuses for people. Now, it's not as bad as it seems. It's not what you might have thought that it was. So, again, there are a variety of stories that are found, everything from Chazal until the different things we have here. And everybody can think in their life. It's sorry to say that when something turned out not the way you thought, you should treasure that and use it as a key for other times to realize, okay, just like that wasn't what I thought, so too this one probably also isn't what I thought. Miller points out this is especially hard to do with the people of your own family, where you're always looking to find fault, and we do have a tendency to find fault. The opposite of being lamed kafschus is this terrible enjoyment you get in discovering, he's not as good as he seemed. I bet, right, he was a crook. I bet he was doing this, all these different things. And in terms of family politics, sometimes people want to build up their own credit by finding things that other people did wrong, as opposed to finding ways to judge favorably what they did. So I'm just going to finish with one story that taught me something about kafschus. I was someplace a couple of years ago, and there was a man standing next to me, and he called up on the phone, wherever he called, and I heard him say, Tagid li, ha-mashgiach higia. He says, tell me, did the mashgiach arrive? And then he said, Shu magia, al titei lo likanesh lamipah. Don't let him into the kitchen. So right away, my heavens go, this guy has some kind of business. Something is wrong in that kitchen. He's trying to keep the mashgiach out of the kitchen. This sounds very good. It's also bad if there's even a place the mashgiach can't get into the kitchen if he wants. And I was trying to think, how am I going to find out where it is to warn the kasher shays to see all these things? Then he picks up the phone again. He says, Abasar me'etmol balayla? The meat from last night, sim et hakol mitoch kufsa v'tichtov al zeh sheva brachot. Put it all in a box and write on it sheva brachot. My mind was getting, okay, it must be the meat. It must be some kind of treif meat. He doesn't want the mashgiach to see. He's telling him to wrap it up and put it in a box that says sheva brachot so the mashgiach won't see. You know, I don't know what to do. And then he continues. He says, the mashgiach drives me crazy. The mashgiach always takes leftovers from every event, right? Without asking me, I don't want it. Okay, so again, there's still things to worry about. How can you keep the mashgiach out of the kitchen? How great is the mashgiach who takes things that don't belong to him to trust him to the gathered? But at least it was a very different picture than what I saw originally. If I hadn't heard that continuation of the conversation, my picture of this again would have been totally different. We have to realize how many times we may be missing something. Don't judge anyone until you're in their place. That's why I'm saying, mamish, in that person's whole life history, an inner world, their character, which you won't be. So don't judge them. At least judge them favorably. And may Hashem judge us favorably as well. Thank you very, very much.